Have you have you ever wondered how flamethrowers work? As an engineering major who has built numerous flamethrowers, I know firsthand what it takes to create these awesome and fun gadgets. You see, as students, we were told by our science teachers that flames were a very dangerous thing to play with. And although that may have been true, what most instructors never taught us was that it can actually be very fun to use when interacted with safely. If you think about it, most of our best holiday experiences come from some sort of flame-based device. And a prime example of that is fireworks. And fireworks and flamethrowers work no differently from one another. See, each of them require an ignition source and a flammable chemical and or gas, which is why today I'm going to speak about the design process, the safety precautions, and the science that goes into creating and operating these fun devices. So the first part is choosing your design. So every flamethrower should accommodate the specific needs of its user. So for example, when they were used in World War I by the Germans on the British, they were used as a means to carry out surprise attacks. If the flamethrowers were too heavy or if they didn't operate when they needed to operate or the way they needed to operate, this could possibly cost many lives. So it's important that when you're creating a flamethrower, you decide on what you're going to use it for. Second, when choosing a design, it's important to consider which type of materials you will use. So most flamethrowers are either made of plastic or metal. It is my personal recommendation that you use metal over plastic, simply because plastic has a tendency to melt much easier than metal. And if you, let's say the gun were to explode, for example, which is very unlikely, the metal would be able to encase the explosion and it would be less hazardous. And lastly, when you're designing a flamethrower, you want to make sure that this flamethrower is able to function with interchangeable parts. So as with any mechanical device, if something were to go wrong with one part, you would be able to simply replace that part without having to throw away the entire gun. Also, the most fun part, which is the science behind the flamethrowers. So every flamethrower, as mentioned before, operates on two main components: an ignition source and a flammable substance. In this case, an ignition source is something like a lighter or a spark plug that when pressed, when their button is pressed, it produces this heat. And whenever you have some sort of gas like propane or butane, when you pull the trigger of your gun, the gas is supposed to seep out and intersect with the heated thing, like the igniter. And what happens is flames just shoot out of the gun. That's how it works. And an important thing to have with any flamethrower is something that we call a flashback arrestor. So a flashback arrestor is simply a device that eliminates the backfiring of fire. So anytime fire is shot out of your flamethrower, the last thing you want to happen is for that fire to backfire into the gun. So a flame arrestor arrests the flames before it re-enters the gun. And if it were to re-enter the gun, it could possibly cause an explosion. So you always want a fire arrestor. And lastly, it's important to choose what type of gas source you will use. So most flamethrowers will either use butane, propane, or regular octane gas that we put in our cars. It is my personal recommendation that you use propane over the three, simply because propane is less hazardous, it's cheaper to find, and it's more accessible to the common consumer. And lastly, safety precautions, which is the most important one. A lot of times we tend to overlook the maintenance that goes into most of the mechanisms that we use, like vehicles and whatnot, which brings me to this most important part. Anytime you create a flamethrower, you want to make sure that you maintain it, because the last thing you want to happen is for your flamethrower to one of its parts to go bad, and the possibility of it causing an explosion is much higher. So you always want to maintain your flamethrower after creating it. Lastly, and also be mindful of where you're shooting your flamethrowers. You don't want to shoot your flamethrowers in the presence of others, and if you do, please make sure that you make them aware of it. And also, always take heed to your national and state laws. There was this article written by the Flamethrowers.com, which read flamethrowers illegal in all 50 states. And it basically spoke about different states having different laws when it comes to the usage and manufacturing of flamethrowers. So before you create a flamethrower, it's always important that you look into that. And also, In this speech, I've covered the design process that's needed to create the flamethrowers, the science behind flamethrowers, and lastly, the safety precautions that go into operating and creating these devices. You see, creation is a very fun activity to take part in, and the last thing you want to do is cause harm or destruction to property, yourself, or someone else. So anytime you engage with a flammable object such as flamethrowers, please make sure that you take heed to your surroundings and obey the law. And lastly, for more information on flamethrowers, I recommend the following channels: Hacksman Industries, Alan Pants Sufficiently Advanced, and lastly, my personal Instagram, where we explain the process that's needed to create fun devices such as this. Thank you for your time and goodbye.